Hi, it's April, and we're going to make chicken number 4 that has a ribbon star quilt block on the inside. To make these chicken quilt blocks, you'll want to do all of the cutting and piecing of the basic chicken body parts like we've done in the previous months, and then cut out the fabric pieces you'll need to make the ribbon star itself. You'll need to have the background chicken fabric. I'm using this green seafoam, and a quilt block fabric. I'm using this dark blue green. They both have great contrast and will work well. Now, this is a super simple block. I'm pretty sure you have made one like this before. And we're making flying geese just like we did in our last block. In fact, the instructions for step 1 say to follow steps 1 through 3 on the previous block, complete with all the diagrams, to make the flying geese units that we'll need for this block. Now, I learned a new trick on how to sew. We're sewing on each side of these marked lines, and I saw a trick for how to do that without marking the lines. So I've never tried it before. I'm going to try it in real life, and we can see how it turns out. I'll be making one set of flying geese with the regular mark these squares with a pen method, and then I'll use the new method. All right, I'm going to go ahead and mark them. I've marked these with a pen, and now I'm going to mark these. Instead of marking them with a pen, I'm going to go over to the iron, fold them in half, and press them so there's a strong crease down the middle. And then instead of sewing on either side of the line, I'll sew on either side of the crease. We'll see how it works. All right, I'm just folding it in half, wrong sides together, and then I'll press it. Make sure it has a really nice strong crease. It sure does. And I'll just let those, as I press them, I'll put them to the side and let them cool down, folded, and that will help the fabric keep its crease. Where if I opened it up while it was still warm, it wouldn't keep its crease as well. You could also use a clapper to put some pressure on that when it cools, or you can just use your pincushion, whatever. I am not very high-tech or fancy, so I kind of use what I have. And I'm letting this sit for quite a few seconds so that I get a really firm crease. I don't know if that's totally necessary because I haven't done this before, but we're gonna try it. I'm kind of excited. I'm kind of excited that you guys get to see this happen in real time. We'll see how it works. All right, so we've got that. While those are cooling, I'm going to pin these just on either corner of the large chicken square with the lines running from corner to corner. And we'll see how this works. All right, now I'm gonna take my little squares that I folded. I'll open those up and lay those on so the crease, instead of the line, runs from corner to corner. We'll see how this works. Have the idea that if the lighting in your sewing room isn't super great, or if your eyesight, isn't super great, which good lighting could definitely help, it might be an issue seeing this crease, but we'll see how it goes. And see how that's a little floppy there? If you want, you can add on this one and on this one, but especially on this one, since the creases make it pop up, can add an extra pin right there in the middle to kind of help keep everything in place. All right, off to the sewing machine. All right, I'm ready to sew. I have my 1/4 inch presser foot on, and I'm just going to sew a 1/4 inch away from the line. I've made sure that this piece, this first piece, is on top of the second square so that it's easy to transition from one square to the other. Just sew off the side, and then I'm going to reverse it and sew on the other side of the line. And then it's starting to push that corner a little bit, so I'll just lift up the presser foot, keep sewing with my guide right on that line. Okay, I'm excited. You guys excited? Now we're gonna try this one. So this is the block where I had the crease. It's a little hard to see in the camera, I think, but it's actually really easy for me to see this, and the guide on my presser foot actually sits like right in the crease. So, well, okay, started to go a little wobbly there. Let's see how it goes. All right, well, it's not quite as exact, I don't think, and it's harder to see the crease than the line, but it's pretty good. Let's try going on the other side. I think it would depend a lot on your light source and just getting the hang of it, right? Like, this is the first time I've done this. So we can't expect the first time of anything to be perfect, right? But not shabby. And I really hate marking lines. Like, it's the worst part of making these flying geese units. So I'll probably give this a try in the future. Let's go cut these apart, press, and then we'll sew on the final pieces. All right, next we're going to cut on the line or on the crease. Normally, I would say you can either choose scissors or a rotary cutter to cut with. Usually, if the block is bigger, I'll definitely use a rotary cutter. If it's smaller, I'll use scissors. I think with this, with the crease and the color of thread I'm using, it's hard to see where to line up my ruler. So I think for this one, the block that I'm doing with the crease, I'm going to just cut with scissors because it's easier for me to see the line. All right. Take these, we're gonna press them. Now I'm gonna put the other squares onto the corner. I'm gonna pin my creased squares on. They are a little harder to handle with the crease because it wants to just move around a little bit and try to get back into its folded shape. But it's not bad. I don't know, I'm gonna give this a try on other projects because I think the more that I do it, the more that I'll like it. And I definitely like pressing better than drawing lines. But if you like drawing lines better than pressing, then I would probably just stick with these drawn lines because this, I mean, this flat piece is a lot easier to place and pin on, and the line is easier to see while sewing. So, but it's always kind of fun to try out a new technique. All right, off to the sewing machine. All right, I'm starting with the flying geese with the drawn line. All right, let's do this crease. That is pretty good. I think starting out, I'm strong. And then about halfway through, it gets to be a little bit harder to see the crease, but it's not awful. It's hard for me to see exactly what you guys are seeing on the camera, but yeah, right about here, it's a little bit harder to see, but no, it looks like we're lined up just. Now we'll cut on the lines and creases and press. Because these units are a little bit smaller, I'm just gonna cut them apart and cut all of them with scissors. Now we'll set the seams and press the dark quilt block fabric triangles open. Next, I'm going to trim off these little dog ears. It'll just make sewing the units together a little bit easier, and it'll reduce the bulk and just weird stuff about the seams. In step 2, we're going to use these fabrics to make a square in the square block, 2 of them, 1 for each block. We're going to do that, we'll take our little background squares, use the size indicated, don't mix them up with the other size. And I have 2 layers here. I'm gonna play a little dangerous and cut 2 layers at a time. So we're just gonna cut these corner to corner. It's a little hard. I have a white polka dot on the corner, so it's a little hard. Boom, to line up. And there we go. So what we're going to do is we're going to sew these onto opposite ends, opposite sides, press it open, and then add them onto the final sides. We want to make sure that these triangles are lined up in the middle of the square, and I can do that by eyeballing how much this little pointy corner extends over the square, and making sure it's this corner extends over the square the same amount. And you might not always do this perfectly, but that's. Grab my pins, and I'll do the same with these. Off to the sewing machine. All right, we're gonna sew the triangles onto either side of the squares with a 1/4 inch seam. And with this point extending, I don't want to start sewing right at the point because my feed dogs can't grab it, and it might get sucked down into the bottom of my it might get sucked down into the bottom of my machine and just get all tangled up. So I like to push this under so far that I know that the first stitch of the needle is going to be either just right on or right before the triangle. And you can either chain piece these, or there's not too many of them, so I'm just gonna turn right back around and stitch the other side. And just repeat the whole same thing on this square. All right, we're going to set the seam on these units and press the triangles open away from the center. The next step is to pin the remaining triangles on. You can trim these corners off now or trim them off later. I kind of like trimming them off later because then you notice they're both lined up there. I can just trim them both off at the same time. But either way works. All right, so 1/4 inch seam, and then we'll come back here and press. It's okay. So I'm going to trim off these dog ears. So cute. And then trim off these dog ears. I love these square in a square blocks. They are somehow super aesthetically pleasing. All right, now we've got our square in a square units, we've got our flying geese units, and we've got some extra little spacing squares, and it's time to put the quilt block together. So what we're gonna do is sew these little squares to either side of these flying geese units. Now, that's something pretty easy to remember. There's no orientation issues. I just sew 2 squares to the flying geese. So I'm actually just gonna pick these up and take them over to the sewing table with me. And they're small enough units that I don't feel that I need to pin because I'm just lining up square edges with square edges. But if you want to pin these, that is just fine. All right, let's go sew them. All right, I know I need to sew a square onto both sides. We'll also sew these flying geese units to these square and square units. You'll want to pin these. They're a little bit bigger of units, and we want to really make sure that the middles are lined up. Sometimes the units might not be exact, but you'll want, like this flying geese unit is slightly bigger than this square and square unit, but I'm going to want that to extend over equally to both sides and line up the flying geese unit in the middle of the square and square unit. Okay. Gonna do the same with these. Remember to make sure that the dark quilt block fabric goes edge to edge with the square and square unit. All right, we're going to take these over to the sewing machine and sew down these edges. As you sew down with a 1/4 inch seam, you're going to want to try to sew over this inner section. There's a stitching line here and a stitching line here. And if you sew right over the middle of it, you'll get a perfect point. All right, here we go. We're just gonna sew the seam. Take out our pins. It's really hard to see those intersecting seam lines, and so I'm just gonna kind of hope for the best. And after I remove the pin, I like to keep some pressure on the fabric here to kind of hold it together. This one doesn't seem to be shifting, but sometimes when you unpin it, it'll try to go where it's not supposed to. So if you just hold it into place a little bit, it can help. Now we'll press with the squares shut. I'll set the seam. And then nudge and press open. In the instructions, I have you press toward the square in the square unit. And the reason I have you do that is because if this seam is pressed out and this seam is pressed in this way and that way, they'll nest up together really nice, and you'll be able to fit. And when you put them next to each other and pin them, you'll be able to like feel with your fingers if they're lined up correctly. However, this is one of the times where I might press this seam open, just because this is a lot of bulk here. There's a lot of, there's 1, 2, 3, 4 seams meeting up right here. So there's a lot of fabric. And so if you want, feel more than free to press this seam open. It will minimize the bulk, but it'll make it harder to nest. So this is one of the 6 of one, half dozen of another type deals. I'll actually try it both ways. This one I'll press open since I already have it here. And the other one I'll press to the side. And that's one thing where if you're either designing a pattern or you're just kind of making up your own design on your own, that you have to think about it. Oh, and this is a trick I used. You can kind of use your fingernail to open the seam a little bit. And that can help you avoid burning your fingers, which is the main reason why I hate pressing the seams open, is because I always feel like I'm going to burn my fingers, or it just takes more time. But kind of giving it a quick press with your fingernails helps. So anyway, so you have to consider, like, is it more important to have the seams nest and make it easier to line up these points, or is it more important to you to reduce bulk? So that one I pressed open. This one I'm going to press towards the center as indicated. And I kind of wonder, if I was to do it over, if I would have that seam be pressed open, because this is a lot of bulk. And this is just a preference thing. The whole point is to get the block to open, is to sew the block together, right? However you get to that final block, it doesn't really matter. You can, lots of quilting is personal preference. But with this, because it is a little bit bulky there, it's laying pretty flat, but I'm gonna give it a spray with some water. And did you see that? Like, when it's wet, it's really stretchy. So you're gonna wanna be really careful when your fabric is wet, not to pull or distort it or move your iron too much, because the water loosens up the fibers so that they can move all over, which sometimes is what you want. But in this case, it is not what we want. All right, boom. That water and made it super nice and flat. I'll actually do the same thing with this one. And it isn't entire, so like there they are next to each other. Once I used the water on them to really press them, it's hard to tell which is which. If I can kind of feel that this one is the one that's pressed inside because it is a little bit thicker, but functionally, I think they're both gonna be just fine. So at this point, we're just gonna sew these cute little units to the top and bottom. And before we go, we'll want to match these seams. And pin them. And so this is the one where the seam is pressed towards the inside. So I have that nice these nice seam edges. So this seam is going this way and this seam is going that way. So I can just kind of wiggle them and make sure they're right next to each other. And that ensures that the seam lines and those points will match. So that's super handy. Just go ahead and pin the other one on, and I wiggle it. Line it up. All right, now I'm gonna pin these ones on. All right, okay, so I like the way this is flatter, but I kind of stand by my press towards the center thing because I hate lining these up. I feel like I have to kind of open it up a little bit and make sure that the seam is lined up and then pin it. You can kind of feel it a little bit, but dude, I'm low-key a little bit lazy and would rather just match seams by feel than have to like look at them. Okay. And then just like make sure that's right. And then match this. All right, I think I could get used to matching them up visually, but I stand by my pressing. I was starting to question the pressing instructions, but I think they're solid. All right, we're gonna sew these seams and that's it. Then our block will be finished. All right, we're just gonna sew down along here. In retrospect, it would have been a good idea to pin here. So what I'm gonna do right now, since I didn't pin, is just open it up, kind of make sure that those are pretty well lined up. And then sew. All right, I forgot to do it over when we were pinning, but it's a really good idea to match these points and give it a pin here. So I'll just kind of flip them over and you can see they're not quite lined up. So I'm gonna just kind of scoot it just a little bit and just do the best you can and pin it. All right, with this final seam, it's really important to set the seam since it's this super long one, and then we'll press towards the outside of the block. And I kind of give it a push all the way down, kind of like that to get it open, and then just hold it. And then I'll give it a spray. Spray it with some water and then just hold it and press it until it's dry. Move over a little bit more. And then press that final seam. I actually spend so much time pressing that I feel like it would be almost boring for you guys. But that's just kind of how long it takes. All right, let's take a look. We got nice corners and pretty nice points. This was the one where I pressed the seams towards the middle. I didn't press the seam open. This is a little bit off, but all right. This is also a great time to trim off any extra strings, any little bits of fraying. Okay, let's press open this one. So I'm going to trim this off. We got some frays here. All right, and then this one looks pretty good too. Slightly flatter. You really can't tell the difference between the two. Either way, so we've made these cute little blocks. This would be a great block to just make even a whole quilt out of, or hot pads out of. Don't feel that you just need to use the blocks in this pattern for the chicken quilt block. There's 12 different interior blocks that you can use in all sorts of different projects. All right, we've got these made. You've hopefully got all of your chicken pieces made already, and then you'll just follow the instructions on page 13 to put together your chicken. You'll have one left facing, one right facing, and you'll be using the comb 2 unit, my favorite split comb. All right, good luck. This is super exciting seeing all of these chicken quilts come together, and I'm so glad you're sewing along. And let me know if you have any questions. Thanks. Bye.